The air was still, not quite still, like even time was holding its breath. Autumn light draped across endless rows of white marble headstones, cold and perfect under the thin sun. A crowd of tourists lined the rope, their voices shrinking to whispers as they watched the lone figure on the black mat. The tomb guard moved like precision, carved into flesh. Hitch, 21st step, a soft echo, each turn sharp enough to slice air. His uniform gleamed, bayonet flashing silver, face locked into an unblinking mask. He seemed less like a man than a monument that had learned how to breathe. Is he even human? A tourist whispered. Don't speak, just watch. A mother replied, barely moving her lips. Then came the sound, a sharp, collapsing thud. A frail, elderly veteran crumpled at the marble steps. His cap slid across the stone as his knees slammed down. A ripple of shock tore through the crowd. Gasps, a strangled cry, the clatter of someone dropping their phone. Children froze. Cameras lifted like drawn swords. Someone call 911, a woman shouted, voice cracking. The guard did not move, rifle locked, chin raised, eyes forward. Protocol bound him like chains. To break it would stain the creed that had shaped his life. Then came another voice, cold, mocking. So much for your sacred rules, sneered a man in a tailored suit at the rope line. A senator, his grin slick as oil. He won't even flinch while a man dies at his feet. Medics surged forward and then stopped, uncertain, glancing toward the silent sentinel as if asking permission. The veteran gasped, clutching his chest. A tarnished dog tag swung loosely from his neck, tapping the marble in tiny metallic beats. And for the first time, the guard's eyes moved, just his eyes. A breath swelled slowly into his chest, controlled, deliberate. Then he stepped off the black mat. A collective gasp ripped the silence. Cameras snapped. Someone cried out. The air itself seemed to recoil. Each bootstep hit the marble like a drumbeat. He stopped just short of the fallen man. He did not touch him, did not kneel. He simply stood there still, tall, unyielding, forming a wall of honor between the dying veteran and the chaos of the world. They thought honor meant staying still. The crowd would whisper later. But in that moment, he showed them what honor truly means. The silence lingered long after the sirens faded. By the time the medics reached the old man, the guard had already stepped back onto his mat, rifle leveled, face unreadable again. The tourists were still whispering about it when they left, half in awe, half in shock. No one knew the guard's name, no one ever did, but he had a name, and a story etched deeper than the marble beneath his boots. His name was Daniel Hayes. Years ago, long before the white gloves and silent watch, Daniel was just another 19-year-old kid trying to survive a desert war. He carried a pack heavier than his own body weight and a photograph folded in his chest. Akita, grinning boy with freckles, his little brother, saluting the camera with a toy rifle. Daniel had promised him he'd come back, promised him he'd be a hero. Then came Kandahar, a deafening blast, a blinding flash, and when the smoke cleared, his best friend, Corporal Reyes, was gone. Just gone. The kind of gone that leaves silence ringing inside your bones. Daniel had been 2 feet away, 2 feet, and somehow alive. He stopped speaking for a week after that. When he finally did, his voice came out like gravel. The army kept him, patched his body, but something inside him stayed shattered. He came home to parades and flags and noise, but none of it could touch the hollow ache. The world had moved on. Reyes had not. It was at Reyes's grave, row upon perfect row of marble, that Daniel saw the guard for the first time. A lone sentinel pacing in impossible precision, eyes locked ahead like he could see through time itself. No emotion, no weakness, no fear, just stillness, carved from duty. Something in Daniel cracked and reformed all at once. That night he filled out the application. The waiting list was years long. He didn't care. He trained harder than he had ever fought. He ran in the rain until his legs shook, memorized the guard's creed until he could whisper it in his sleep, polished his shoes until he could see his broken reflection staring back at him. When he finally earned the badge, they shaved his head and burned away his name. From that day on, he belonged to the tomb, and in that silence, he found a strange kind of peace. The public never saw what it cost them, the sleepless nights, the relentless inspection, the bone-deep weight of carrying centuries of sacrifice on your shoulders without ever blinking. They thought the guard's stillness was easy. They never saw the storm it took to hold it. And then there was the man who had mocked him to die, Senator Warren, Kells, sharp jaw, sharper tongue. He had built his career on spectacle, the kind that made headlines and crushed people. A man who smiled for cameras while quietly cutting the budgets of veterans' hospitals, who called military funerals pageantry and leaked emails. He wasn't at Arlington to honor anyone. He was here for a photo-op, a patriotic backdrop for his next campaign speech. And when the old veteran had fallen, he'd seen it not as tragedy, but as theater. His smirk when the guard moved had been the smirk of a man who thinks nothing is sacred, yet Arlington itself was sacred. Every blade of grass here stood above a soldier who never came home. Every marble headstone marked someone who had once laughed, loved, bled, and believed enough to die for people they would never meet. The tomb of the unknown soldier rose at the heart of it, all three sculpted figures, and a white stone sarcophagus, holding men whose names the world had lost, but whose sacrifice it would not dot day and night. Through hurricane winds and blistering heat, the guard kept watch. They walked their 21 steps in silent perfection, turned on the 21st, paused exactly 21 seconds, and returned. It was the highest military honor that could not be given on the earned. Less than 1 in 500 who applied ever made it. Daniel had, and though the world did not know his name, he carried the names of the lost inside him with every step. As the tourists left that afternoon, their footsteps fading down the stone path, Daniel remained on his mat, still as the marble around him. The senator lingered, phone in hand, pacing near the rope like a wolf bored of its cage. Daniel's eyes never moved, but deep behind them, memories flickered. The sandstorm roar of Kandahar, Reyes's laugh echoing in the dark, the folded photograph worn soft from years of carrying it. Duty had built a wall inside him, but behind that wall, his heart was not stone. It was scarred, and it was beating. And when he had stepped off that mat earlier, when the dying veteran's dog tag had tapped the stone like a final heartbeat, Daniel had felt something he hadn't felt in years, a crack in the stillness, a reminder that beneath all the silence, he was still alive. The next morning, the crowd was even larger. News of what had happened had already rippled through social media overnight. Grainy clips of the guard stepping off his mat, captions screaming, "Tomb, Sentinel breaks protocol," and silent hero moves. Reporters clustered near the rope, long lenses clicking like insect eyes. Veterans stood stiff-spined, caps over their hearts. Tourists whispered, phones raised, waiting to see if the motionless sentinel would do anything. Human again. He didn't. Daniel's boots struck marble with the same measured rhythm, each step erasing any doubt that yesterday had been anything but duty. He was iron again. He was silence again. But Senator Kells was still there, leaning lazily on the rope. He wore a navy suit that gleamed under the sun and a grin that didn't. His aides hovered nearby, murmuring into phones, while he scrolled through headlines on his own. Every few minutes his eyes flicked up toward the guard, like a cat watching a bird it couldn't reach. "Can you believe this circus?" he muttered, loudly enough for the press to hear. "Millions in taxpayer dollars for a statue that walks." A couple of veterans stiffened. A child frowned. Daniel didn't move. Kells smirked wider, sensing the tension like a shark scenting blood. He turned slightly, voice rising as if giving a speech. "You know what discipline really is," he called out, gesturing at the guard. "It's obeying orders, even when they're stupid, even when someone's dying at your feet." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. A man in a wheelchair, his pant leg pinned where his knee used to be, tightened his jaw. Daniel's bayonet glinted. His face was marble. Kells took a step closer to the rope, his shoes clicking like coins on stone. "You all cheer him for not helping," he said, sweeping a hand toward the crowd. "But imagine if that old man had died. Would you still clap? Would you still post your little hashtags about honor?" A young woman near the front whispered, "Shut up," but didn't lift her eyes from the guard. Kells heard her anyway. He smiled. He thrived on this. Conflict was oxygen to him. "Because I'll tell you what I saw," he continued, voice rising. "I saw a soldier trained to obey rules so blindly he forgot how to be a human being." The words hung like acid, and still Daniel walked 21 steps. Turn, pause, 21 seconds. The sound of his boots became louder than Kells's voice, louder than the crowd's uneasy shifting. It was like watching two storms circle each other, one all thunder and bluster, the other made of stone and silence. Then Kells laughed. A sharp, hollow sound. "Maybe he's not allowed to speak," he said. "Maybe there's nothing inside him left to speak with." That broke something in the crowd. Gasps, sharp intakes of breath, a low hiss of disapproval. A veteran muttered a curse under his breath. Daniel's eyes didn't flicker, but his left hand flexed, just once, before locking back onto the rifle stock. Kells noticed. "And, like any predator, he went for the movement. See," he said, pointing. "Even statues crack." A ripple of camera shutters fired. Somewhere a little girl clutched her father's arm and whispered, "Why is he being mean?" Her father didn't answer. His jaw was locked. The sun climbed higher, glinting off marble and brass. Heat shimmered off the plaza. Daniel's dress blues absorbed it like armor. Sweat ran like invisible threads down his spine, but his face stayed carved from duty. He had stood guard through hurricanes, through lightning, through funerals where mothers wailed like the sky had split. He could stand through this. He would, but Kells wasn't done. He slowly circled the rope, speaking now to the cameras as much as the crowd. "This whole place is performance," he said, gesturing at the white rose stretching into forever. "Stone and ceremony so people can pretend death means something." A collective gasp shuddered through the onlookers. One of the older veterans, his back bowed, chest glittering with medals, took a half-step forward, lips trembling, but stopped himself. Even he knew touching the guard's mat was forbidden. The air thickened like a storm about to break. Phones hovered like hawks. Children stood wide, sensing something huge and fragile trembling on the edge. And then Kells crossed the invisible line. He ducked under the rope. Gasps, cries. A camera clattered to the stone. The plaza froze. Even the birds seemed to stop mid-air. Kells straightened his jacket, stepping onto the marble with a casual arrogance that made the ground itself feel desecrated. His shoes clicked closer, closer. Each step echoed like a nail driven into the silence. Daniel's eyes snapped to him. Only his eyes. But the effect was like a gun cocking. Kells smirked. "You can't stop me," he whispered, just loud enough for Daniel to hear. "You're not allowed to move." Daniel's jaw locked. His right boot landed on the 21st step. He turned, paused, counted the seconds in his head. 3, 4, 5. Kels's shadow crossed the edge of the black mat. The crowd erupted. Warnings, someone yelling for security, but no one moved fast enough. Because no one could believe what they were seeing. No one crossed that line, no one. And yet here was a man doing it with a smile, daring the world's most disciplined soldier to react, testing if the wall would break. Children were crying now. Veterans were trembling, fists white-knuckled around canes and caps. The cameras buzzed like a swarm. Daniel inhaled, slow, steady, his pulse hammered like a war drum, but his face was the tomb. He stepped, one boot off the black mat. The marble sang under the sudden weight, and the world went silent. The room seemed frozen in time. Even the flicker of the fluorescent lights above paused as the weight of the moment settled over everyone present. The young man, Liam, who had moments ago been spitting insults, now stood trembling, his smirk wiped clean. Across from him, the tomb guard had not moved an inch yet. Something about him had changed. His stillness was no longer just discipline. It was power, coiled and waiting. The old general's words hung in the air like a challenge. "Son, do you even know who you just disrespected?" Liam swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing like he'd just realized he was standing on the edge of a cliff. "He's just guarding a grave," he muttered, his voice thin, more excuse than argument. The general's gaze sharpened. "That grave holds soldiers who gave their lives so you could stand here and run your mouth. And that man," he pointed at the guard, his finger trembling not from weakness, but from contained fury, "has sworn to protect it, even if it means his life." Something cracked in the air. Not a sound, more like the invisible tension of a bowstring being drawn to its limit. The guard's eyes, which had stared forward like glass all this time, shifted just slightly toward Liam. It was such a small movement, yet it landed like a hammer. Liam flinched as if struck. Then the general did something no one expected. He stepped back, heels together, spine straight, and snapped a salute at the tomb guard. A sudden motion rang through the room like a gunshot. The other customers, who had been holding their breath, turned in astonishment. A decorated 4-star general saluting a silent guard in the middle of a gun shop. The sight hit Liam like a tidal wave of shame. The guard did not return the salute. He simply stood there, like stone, like time itself, unshaken, unyielding. The silence after the salute was deafening. The world seemed to narrow down to just the three of them. The young man who had mocked, the general who had honored, and the guard who had endured. Then slowly, the general lowered his arm and turned back to Liam. His voice was quieter now, but carried steel. "He won't speak to defend himself. He doesn't need to. His duty speaks louder than anything you could ever say." Liam's face was pale, eyes darting like a trapped animal's, but something else flickered there now: confusion, crumbling arrogance, and the first hint of understanding. No one moved. No one breathed. And in that unbearable silence, something in the balance of power shifted forever. Liam's breath came shallow and ragged, like a man standing on thin ice, terrified of the cracks he could already hear forming beneath his feet. The general's words echoed in his skull, dull thunder that refused to fade. He doesn't need to defend himself. His duty speaks louder than anything you could ever say. With gunshop, once buzzing with casual chatter, had become a cathedral of silence. Even the faint hum of the refrigerators in the back seemed to vanish. All eyes were on the tomb guard. He hadn't flinched, hadn't uttered a syllable, hadn't even acknowledged the storm that had unfolded around him. He simply was anchored, immovable, a monument in human form. And then, he moved. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden burst of speed, no raised voice or clenched fists, just the slow, deliberate turning of his head. A mechanical pivot, like a turret locking onto a target. His eyes clear, unblinking, met Liam's for the first time. The effect was instantaneous. Liam's knees buckled as if gravity had doubled. His phone slipped from his sweat-slick fingers and clattered on the tile floor, the sound unnaturally loud. He stumbled back, nearly crashing into a rack of rifle scopes. No one spoke, not even the general. The tomb guard took a single step forward. The click of his heel against the floor was sharper than a gunshot. Liam's chest seized. He felt something primal grip him, the instinct of prey before a predator. His voice broke into a stammer. Look, I didn't mean, it was just a joke. The guard took another step. Stop, please, Liam whispered, voice cracking. Another step. The young man's back hit the wall. His breath hitched like he'd run miles. He couldn't look away from those eyes that weren't angry or cruel, just cold, empty of everything except duty. Duty so absolute it erased the man inside, leaving only the oath. The general finally spoke, his tone quiet but laced with iron. This is what you mocked. This is what you spat on. A man who's been trained to bury every shred of ego, every human impulse, until nothing remains but honor. Liam squeezed his eyes shut, as if that could block it all out. But when he opened them, the guard was closer, only an arm's length away now, close enough that Liam could see the faint lines etched by years of silent, relentless discipline. Then the guard stopped. The stillness was suffocating. They were face to face, barely a breath between them. Liam trembled, waiting for something, a shout, a punishment, anything. But the guard only raised his hand. With mechanical precision, he brought it to his brow and snapped a salute. It was a gesture so sharp, so flawless, it seemed to slice through the air. The entire room flinched at the crack of his palm striking the brim of his cap. Liam blinked, stunned. A salute to him. The guard held the salute, eyes locked on Liam, unwavering. Then, just as deliberately, he lowered his arm, turned on his heel, and walked away. Not a word, not a glare, nothing. The sound of his boots receded, each step echoing like a drumbeat down the long aisle of the shop. He stopped near the exit, resuming his rigid stance as if the confrontation had never existed. Liam's body sagged as if the tension holding him upright had snapped. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his face with trembling hands. The shame was unbearable, acidic, burning through every layer of pride he had wrapped around himself. The general stepped forward, looking down at him. There was no triumph in his eyes, only disappointment, deep and heavy. He saluted you, the general said quietly, not because you deserve it, but because he refuses to be anything less than the honor he serves. Liam's breath hitched with a strangled sob. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to escape the weight crushing him from all sides. You think strength is loud, the general continued, his voice low but cutting. But real strength is silent. It endures. It doesn't need applause or revenge or even thanks. He let the words settle like falling stones. And you had the audacity to laugh at it. Liam's tears hit the floor in soft, humiliating drops. He could feel everyone watching, but no one jeered. No one moved. The silence was worse than any ridicule could have been. The general crouched, lowering himself until his eyes were level with Liam's. You want to be a man, he said. Start by respecting the ones who stand guard while the rest of us sleep. Liam couldn't speak. His throat was a locked fist. The general stood, boots clicking like punctuation. He gave Liam one last, piercing glance. Get up, he ordered, and leave. Liam stumbled to his feet, numb and hollow like a marionette with cut strings. He didn't look at anyone as he shuffled toward the door. When he passed the tomb guard, he dared a single glance. The guard stood motionless, eyes forward, untouched by the chaos he'd just unraveled, with nothing but silence and a salute. And somehow, that made the shame burn even deeper. Liam pushed open the door and stepped out into the daylight, blinking hard against the glare. The air outside felt heavier, as if he were walking under the weight of every unseen sacrifice buried beneath that guard's watch. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The shop's door closed behind Liam with a hollow chime, and just like that, the storm was over. The crowd inside remained frozen for a few stunned seconds, as if their minds were still catching up to what their eyes had witnessed. Then, like glass, slowly thawing, the murmurs began, soft, tentative, disbelieving. But the tomb guard never moved. He stood near the exit, boots planted square, rifle cradled in his arms, eyes locked straight ahead. Not a flicker of pride or triumph passed across his face. He didn't watch Liam go. He didn't bask in the quiet awe now rippling through the onlookers. It was as though the confrontation had been nothing more than another gust of wind brushing against a stone statue. Momentary, irrelevant. General Whitaker stayed back for a moment, silently studying the guard as though seeing him for the first time. Then he drew a slow, deliberate breath, stepped forward, and stopped at the guard's side. He snapped to attention. The sharp crack of his boots striking together jolted everyone. Heads whipped around as the decorated general's silver stars gleaming on his collar lifted his hand in a precise salute. Not to the crowd, not to the flag overhead, to the guard. A ripple passed through the shop. Even the veterans who'd remained silent, stiff-backed with folded arms, shifted on their feet. They knew the weight of what they were witnessing. The guard did not return the salute. He remained locked in position, as protocol demanded. The general held his own a beat longer, then lowered it, his expression softening as he turned slightly toward the crowd. "This," he said, his voice carrying a quiet gravity that silenced every whisper, "is what sacrifice looks like when it's given shape." A child, maybe 7 or 8, clutched her father's pant leg, wide-eyed. She tugged gently, voice a trembling whisper, "Daddy, is he a hero?" Her father's eyes glistened. "Yes," he said hoarsely, "the kind you don't always see, but the kind that never stops standing." The words seemed to hang in the air like dust motes catching light. The general turned back to the guard, his gaze falling briefly to the man's gloved hands. Something metallic glimmered faintly there, an old dog tag looped around the butt of his rifle, the letters nearly worn smooth. It was the kind of detail only a soldier would notice. Whitaker's chest tightened. He knew that looked the small tokens men carried for ghosts who never came home. He wondered, just for a fleeting instant, whose name was etched into that fading steel. And how many nights this silent sentinel had stood alone, whispering promises to it under his breath. Without another word, the general gave a solemn nod. The guard didn't move. Whitaker exhaled, turned, and strode toward the door. The crowd parted silently to let him pass. Some placed hands over their hearts. Others simply bowed their heads. No one spoke. At the threshold, the general paused. He glanced back one last time. The guard was still there, motionless, resolute, framed by the faint golden light slanting through the shop windows like the final rays of a fading sun. Whitaker murmured something, too low for anyone else to hear. Then he stepped outside. The bell above the door jingled softly. Inside, the guard remained, alone now, except for the faint echo of boots and whispers. He did not shift, did not sigh, did not betray the slightest trace of the storm he had endured. He simply resumed. Standing, watching, guarding, and though the crowd slowly trickled out, hushed and changed, they carried something with them, something heavier than rifles or medals, the weight of what it truly meant to bear an oath, and never lay it down. The shop was nearly empty now. The shelves stood silent, the hum of the lights soft again, as if the world itself had lowered its voice out of respect. Only the tomb guard remained, frozen in his post, a solitary figure carved from discipline itself. Outside, the last of the crowd drifted away in hushed clusters, their conversations no louder than the rustle of leaves. No one laughed, no one argued. Even Liam, long gone, had left behind a strange stillness like the echo after a bell tolls, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the graves of Arlington lay quiet beneath the setting sun, endless rows of white markers catching the dying light, their shadows stretching long and thin across the sacred ground. It was for them he stood, for every name etched in stone, for every promise made and never broken, for every sleepless night someone else could rest because he did not. That was the thing about men like him. They didn't stand for applause or headlines or glory. They stood because it was right, because tradition is not weakness, and stillness is strength. If you've watched this far, take a moment, share this story, tell someone what you saw. Let them remember that silence can be mightier than fury, that honor can speak without words. Because long after the noise fades, long after the crowds forget, men like him will still be there watching, guarding, and never stepping aside.